So Jesus sees no conflict between having obligations to a non-Christian government and having your obligation towards God. So you have your obligations towards God, you have your obligations towards your government, which isn't even a Christian government. What I'm saying is, then those two things combine. Well, I mean, if you're talking about obligations to a government, that would be, I mean, in that case, it's paying taxes. You had an obligation to pay taxes. So
you have to support the invasion, you have to support the killing, you have to support with your taxes, as you mentioned, all of this expansionist war, all of the torture, all of the slavery, all of the sex slavery. This is what Caesar is doing, and Jesus is saying, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So that's an endorsement. How is your interpretation that you mentioned several times? This is my interpretation. This is my interpretation. Okay, I don't really care for your interpretation. I want to know what Christianity actually says, and I consider these figures within Christian history much more authoritative than you. I mean, Augustine also justified persecuting heretics. Right, you're quoting Augustine, but he's also justifying that in his books.
And what I'm saying is, if you look at what Jesus said, you don't get the idea that you're supposed to go around killing heretics. Again,
when you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, that is an endorsement of that government, which was killing heretics, killing. That's the tradition that you're citing, right, with Constantine.
That government, what heretics was the Roman government?
Jesus Christ, he was crucified, right, according to you.
No, you're a little confused. You're a little confused as to what I'm saying.
Jesus did you forget that Jesus was being persecuted?
Followed on big things like going around killing people.
Yeah,
that would be kind of a big one.
Yeah, they did take that. They did take that from the Old Testament. Augustine is
We're not
citing
talking about
it.
Augustine here.
Theodosius is citing it. Constantine is citing it. All of these other Christians throughout history are citing the Old Testament to justify expansionist war, because they are looking for, as Christians, guidance on how to run their state. They're trying to run society according to Christian values. You have this preposterous position that the Bible has nothing applicable to running a state.
There are commands that are directed towards Christians, right? Jesus saying that that we have to love everyone, including our enemies. That's directed towards
how is that
people
a
of his
policy that a Christian state can take?
You're talking about.
I love the enemies that are approaching my city and are about to commit genocide.
Jesus doesn't tell a state. You can't talk to a state. Jesus isn't talking to a state.
So
he's
then
talking to
a Christian civilization can't exist. The Christian nation cannot exist. Many people consider America a Christian nation. And if an invading force comes, the Christians are all supposed to lie down and lay down their weapons because Jesus said, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I live in Texas. I think the Texans over here are not going to be very happy about this kind of interpretation that you are imposing on Jesus and saying that this is his message for a Christian nation. Actually, there is no Christian nation. There is no guidance on that level.
To do.
I mean, cite one Christian authority prior to
Jesus.
modernity,
Jesus
who has the same interpretation as you, that you should let blasphemers just run wild in society, in Christian society. Name one Christian authority.
Jesus.
No, this is a circular argument. The whole question is interpreting what Jesus has said because you're saying that, again, don't lift the sword is something that applies to all of society. But how is that possible? How can that apply to all of society? Because invaders can come and annihilate the Christian nation if you take Jesus' statement, as you're doing, and apply it more widely to the societal level. That's the whole problem, David. And that's why no Christian prior to modernity said never punish blasphemers. Blasphemers should have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Cite me one Christian authority who has this interpretation of Jesus' words. That's my question.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm giving you Jesus' words. You quoted 1 Samuel. The Amalekites are supposedly wiped out by Saul. They were down to the last.
You're saying that there's no killing involved in this. They're just driven off. What does driven off the land mean? I mean, this is such a ridiculous interpretation. Like, there's so many. Look at Numbers 21. The destruction of King Sihon and King Og. So they smote, and his son.
I'm not saying there's no killing. So if you're saying there's killing, yes. As far as these groups being completely exterminated and all their children killed, I'm saying the Bible refutes that interpretation because the groups are still there later.
I didn't make that interpretation. I didn't use the word genocide. All I'm pointing out is that there's mass violence, there's mass killing.
Okay.
of children and infants.
That's where I'm having the problem.
There's nothing there in Islam, by the way.
I was talking about how later on, you're talking about centuries later. Again, three centuries of Christianity. If you're a heretic, the message is, there's the door, dude. We'll try and convince you otherwise, but if you're not going to listen to the leaders in the church,
Christians weren't in power to impose those kinds of laws in those centuries. It only was with Constantine. It was only with this conversion of the Roman Empire to Catholicism that they had the power. And as soon as they got power, as you just cited yourself with Constantine, they started killing in the name of the cross. Jesus' example, look, there's multiple contradictions I'm pointing out. If you take Jesus' example of not lifting the sword, don't defend yourself against violence, turn the other cheek. These aren't rules that you can extrapolate and make rules for an entire Christian nation. Otherwise, Christianity would have been wiped out within, the first few centuries. That's the main point that I'm trying to make. But you just keep referring to, okay, well, Jesus didn't say this, Jesus didn't say that. But those aren't rules that can be applied on a macro scale. And this seems to be a problem for your interpretation of Christianity. Other Christians throughout history did not share your interpretation. They did engage in execution of blasphemers. They did execute the apostates. Look at the Justinian, look at the Byzantine Empire, look at the Spanish Reconquista. They all had this interpretation that is much in line with actually what we find in Islam. You're the only one, and Christians who follow this kind of liberalized Christianity, you're the only one who does not see that.
His rules make him sound massively obsessive compulsive. Most people don't know, but you have rules for plucking here and there, and it's just he was obsessed with controlling every little facet of your life. You look at that and say, you see, it's this holistic thing, and this proves that it's from God. I'm looking at that saying, this is the weirdest dude I've ever encountered in my entire life.
Second of all, you're calling Islam obsessive and the Sharia obsessive. But hello, have you heard of Mosaic law? Have you heard of the Talmud? Have you heard of all of these kinds of rules and regulations that are found regarding the Sabbath and keeping kosher? Take a look at that maybe and see if you're not overwhelmed with the amount of rules that are required in Orthodox Judaism, which is exactly derived from the Old Testament according to Orthodox Jews. So,
you say the Talmud has lots of rules too. This isn't about having lots of rules. He was obsessed with controlling every little facet of your life. Say the Talmud has lots of rules too. This isn't about having lots of rules. He was obsessed with controlling every little facet of your life. According to the Christian perspective, the Old Testament is a kind of schoolmaster until we actually get the law written on our hearts. And so it's not surprising that you would have rules, but that's not the issue here. It's that Muhammad comes with nothing except issue upon issue upon issue. And I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert to the Euphrates River. There were times when the Jews would need to go to war with people from farther off, but this concept of them having this obligation to go out and violently subjugate the world, that's an Islamic concept.
So I have the passage in Deuteronomy. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When your Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put the sword to all the men in it. As for women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves, and you may use the plunder of the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. This is how you are to treat all the cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. So this is very explicit that it's talking about nations that are nearby and nations that are not nearby, meaning the entire world. And again, this is how authoritative scholars like Maimonides have interpreted, including Roman emperors, including the Byzantines, including the Spanish, on and on. Only modern liberal Christians such as yourself, who really, your true religion is liberal secularism and modern human rights, and you're just putting this Christian window dressing. Only Christians like that have a different interpretation of this verse.
You said that my religion is modern liberalism. No, modern liberalism has been influenced by my religion, but then they took God out of the equation.
And this idea that Christianity is inspired liberalism, I mean, this is very silly because, again, the main writers of liberalism and the main creators of liberalism were deists. They were atheists. Some of them were extremely hostile to traditional Christianity, and they actually wanted to leave the influence of Christianity and the church and the influence of Scripture. So I think your history there is quite messed up. In fact, when you look at the actual Christian fathers and the Roman Catholic Church, they were extremely harsh about stamping out blasphemy. They were extremely harsh about stamping out any kind of heresy. So I guess according to you, they misunderstood Jesus' message because they were forcing mass conversion. They were killing the heretics. They were killing the blasphemers. I guess they, for 1,000 years, or actually 1,700 years, didn't understand the true message of Christianity. It only took John Locke or Thomas Jefferson to come along and say that, actually Christianity is inspiring us to write the Declaration of Independence and to value free speech so that people can go and make piss Christ. I mean, this is a very bizarre interpretation.